Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Bro. Welcome to this month's webinar. Excited to talk to you about timesheets today. We'll go through some timesheet options and best practices and hopefully answer some questions. So a little bit of a high-level agenda. We're going to talk about timesheet setup options and some key reports. We'll talk about ability to capture additional data through the timesheet process and some expanded use cases. We'll dive into the time entry tab a little bit and show you some features there, some timesheet options if you're looking to kind of auto-populate. And then we've done some scripting and for customers that will give you some examples where we've had some requests to create some customizations around timesheets. And then lastly, we'll talk about timesheet corrections and what are some of the options. So let's talk about timesheets. When we meet with customers, timesheets are often a very long conversation because there's a lot of discussion to be had and there's a lot of setup options in OpenAir. First thing we'll ask customers is, okay, do you have an expectation? So what are some of the timesheet rules that we want to enforce through the timesheet process? And the most common rule is, hey, no one can enter more than 24 hours on a single day. Well, that's easy to set up and work through. The other question is are people expected to put in hours equivalent to what their work schedule is? And so, if I'm a 40-hour person, I'm expected to put at least 40 hours on my timesheet. If I'm a 24-hour person and I have a 24-hour work schedule, am I expected to put 24 hours on my timesheet? So this is an option within the timesheet rules. We recommend using a percentage of work schedule to allow for varying work schedules. And it does give you the ability to either warn a user when they submit a timesheet with less than their work schedule hours, or error out when someone is submitting a timesheet where they have to fill in the additional hours. So the downside of this option is it is a global setting. You cannot enable it for some departments or not others. So as you're thinking about whether this is beneficial, you do have to take that into consideration. And generally what we see is the warning is the most popular option because it does give folks the ability to not ignore, but push through that warning. The other discussion often had is, okay, what do your timesheet periods look like in your current system and what do we want them to look like in OpenAir? Obviously, weekly is the most popular. We have some customers that are also doing semi-monthly. I've seen bi-weekly. A lot of it depends on the accounting periods that are used and if there's a high level of time and material billing that needs to happen. Also, it's what days of the week do you want to start your time and when are timesheets due? And that feeds how we set the system up. Our recommendation is generally if you can adhere to a Saturday to Friday timesheet, that seems to work really well because it allows people on a Friday to know everything's due by end of day Friday, and you don't have to worry about if you have to be called in the weekend, that's time for next week. The other question we get from customers is, can I control timesheet periods? And you can. There is a feature in OpenAir where you can set timesheet periods and you can set which periods are open and remove those periods when they're closed. And by removing the period when it's closed, it basically, if someone hasn't created a timesheet and when they go to create one, they cannot create that timesheet for that period. Now, what we see is that individual will have to go to their manager or to an administrator to say, can you open this period for me? And you can actually open a period for a specific user on their user record without globally opening that period. So that's a feature. It does take a little bit of administration to manage that, but it is available. And we do have a few clients that are managing those timesheet periods. I mentioned timesheets being due. One of the big helps of being able to get time in on a disciplined basis is using the out-of-the-box timesheet alerts. There's a few options. We have some customers that want everyone to enter their time every day and save it. And if they don't enter time in a particular day, they want to be able to send them an alert. So there is the ability to have an alert go out if someone has not entered time for a particular day. Obviously, the more common is I'm late, and the late submissions can be, you can have multiple late submissions. You could have a reminder one saying, hey, remember Friday is close of the week. Please get your timesheet in by end of the day Friday. And then you could have additional ones, for Saturday, Sunday, or Monday that escalate to those that are missing timesheets or they haven't submitted their timesheets. And that can be really helpful. One other note for timesheet alerts, and we've been working a lot with companies on a couple of fronts. One is integrating these alerts with Slack, being able to use a Slack type tool to be able to send these reminders when things are overdue. And another one is there's a tool called Trulio out there that sends texts, and being able to incorporate timesheet alerts through texting to your end users. So there's a couple of different alert options. If email is not enough, we can look to other avenues of communication. And obviously, if you have approval processes, you want to be able to identify who is sitting on approvals and what's holding those up, and we have those sort of alerts as well. The other thing that we've come across is for global organizations, setting these alerts can be tricky because of the time zone changes. And what we recommend there is if you can organize your department structure based on different regions, you can use department filters in the timesheet alerts. So you could say this is a UK alert based on the UK department, and then we schedule those based on UK timeframes versus US timeframes. So by using department filters and mimicking your regional requirements, you can then control the timing of these alerts as they go out. Alerts are great, but obviously you want to be able to monitor what's happening with the timesheet process. And within the advanced reports, the most powerful report is that timesheet status report. And this is a great report for kind of seeing who at a global basis, who's tardy, who's missing a timesheet, who has submitted a timesheet, but it's being held up, and who's holding it up from an approval process. You could schedule reports in OpenAir, obviously, so you could schedule this report to get to you when timesheets are due or overdue. So, timesheet status report is a great tool for being able to determine when everybody's compliant or who is not compliant. And then lastly, we see a lot of customers that struggle around month end. If you're doing heavy time and material billing, especially, when the month ends on a Wednesday, what do you do? Do you close the month the Friday before, or do you wait for the Friday after, both of which have downsides? You can also implement month-end controls in OpenAir. So it'll systematically control week splits for calendar weeks that cross months. So last month, we had Monday and Tuesday fall into February. March kicked in on Wednesday, so we did a split week, and OpenAir automatically split the timesheets for the end users so that they didn't have to do so, and controls that. So that's really helpful for getting those hours in through the end of the month so they can be processed and sent through the billing process in a timely fashion. So data capture is something we see from customers requiring different data elements that they need to collect through the timesheet process, and OpenAir gives you a few options. There's a feature called payroll type, and this is basically everyone who uses this and renames it to something else. What we've seen use cases for this is where you could have, for example, a list of states in the US. And as people are doing work on their timesheet, they're selecting what state they worked in, or the customer location or the work location. And this is really helpful for being able to report on time within those different regions or states or locations. And sometimes for tax purposes, how many hours did we spend in the state of Texas last year, and could determine what sort of taxation we run into. So depending on your business and how you report taxes, being able to have that as part of but you don't have to use it for location. You could use it for lots of different options, as you need to capture additional data. And it's standard field. It's available in the timesheet settings, and it's also available in summary reports. So being able to subtotal by this different payroll types, as well as detail reports as well. And it just creates another drop-down option on the timesheet line. Time type's probably the more popular option that we see customers benefiting. There's a few things that timesheet type does. The one thing it's probably most helpful is you can actually filter billing rules by time type. And so this could be helpful if you are allowing the end user to pick a task and decide if it's billable or non-billable. Rather than having the non-billable flag set on the task behind the scenes, the end user can determine if the hours should be billed or not. We don't see this very often, but it is a capability of that. And then you could filter the billing rules to say only the billable time gets processed, and it keeps you from having to have multiple tasks. You have a single task in that example where you're coding both types of time. Also, overtime is pretty popular use case here. Is, as customers are struggling with how do we track overtime versus standard time, and having standard and overtime options on the dropdown can give you the ability to parse out hours, report on hours that are overtime. You could also potentially, if you're doing any sort of time and a half billing for overtime, you can have separate billing rules for standard time versus overtime that you may have different rates for. And then also, on-site or remote location, you could, use this for location similar to what we talked about with payroll type. So there's a lot of different scenarios. These are just a couple of ones that we've seen. One thing to note, when you enable time types and it shows on a timesheet, it's going to show as the first selection on the timesheet, which is generally not optimal. You generally want to pick the project, then the task, and then you pick the time type. In order for it to move to the end of the after the task, you have to enable the value restriction within the project. And so what that means is there's a setting in OpenAir that allows you to restrict which time types are allowable in the for the timesheet by project. So for example, if you have time types where you're capturing activities, which is another common use case, and there are certain activities that may be valid for certain projects and certain activities that may not. You can set those at a project level and then automatically filter which activities are pickable on the timesheet when that project is selected. And by doing so, you're moving the time type order of operation after the project and the task is selected. The time type then becomes selectable. And so that can be really helpful as well. And they have the same reporting values of summary reports and detail reports as well. And the other thing around time types is you can limit those within filter sets. So unlike payroll types, you could actually say these time types are only available within these filter sets. So it's another feature of time types that could be helpful that you don't have in payroll types. The time entry tab, I feel like everyone now knows the benefits of this. When this first came out a few years ago, it was awesome because you didn't have to go run a report to see time entry detail. You could just go into the timesheet and go into the time entries, and then you could filter on by project, by customer, and see all the details right there and be able to pivot between projects, between customers without having to filter and edit reports. So time entries is great feature that was added many years ago, I guess, at this point. There was an enhancement to it in 2021 to basically allow whether you want to allow a role to be able to see the timesheet at the time entry as well as time entry as links. So if you wanted to take that away from an end user where they could see the detail but not actually drill down, that is actually a role permission that was released in the April 2021 release. You get all the filtering capabilities for date ranges, the advanced filter, column filters, all available within the time entry report. And it does respect the role level control. So if I'm only allowed to see my timesheets, when I click on time entries, I'm also only allowed to see my time entries. And the time entries access is also a role. So you can actually take that away if you need to, but from a role. Another feature of the time entry tab that I don't think gets used a lot, but I find it really helpful, is being able to monitor your subcontractors and what time they've entered, and then what have they billed you for, and what's been processed and what hasn't. And this allows you to bulk select the time entries and be able to mark them as paid in this example, and then be able to say this was paid by invoice 1234. Or if you don't, if you pay your subcontractors by the time in OpenAir without requiring an invoice, then you could just come in at the end of the month or the end of the timesheet period, see what time is there, mark it as paid. You could say this is August payroll, and then be able to calculate, get the hours from this times the hourly rate. And then when you come in next month, you can see, if they were late with a timesheet, you can see which hours were paid, which ones weren't. And so this is a great feature. And to set this up, it actually does not a switch. It just requires a couple of custom fields on the time entry record. And once you put these custom fields in place, this feature automatically becomes available. And so we find it, a lot of customers find it useful. Say, okay, what time has been entered this month by my contractors and we haven't received an invoice for it, so I want to be able to accrue costs in my financial system for the month. And this is a way to be able to do that and be able to generate accrual reports and help in that aspect. Timesheet population. There's some in the timesheet rules, they give you some other options which allow you to auto-populate hours from bookings or other options. We generally try to tell customers this could be problematic unless people are, just booked 8 hours a day to the same project over, like an internal project that you want to be able to use. But auto-populating can have some risks of the end users accepting the hours without actually changing them. So you have to think about the process. You can also if you're using OpenAir schedule requests or time off requests, you can have it auto-populate those requests. So if I take vacation, request vacation next week, I'm going to create my timesheet for next week. I can auto-populate those hours, and then I can adjust them if I actually ended up not taking the actual hours. And then that's a nice benefit of using OpenAir's schedule requests. And then when you're creating a new timesheet, cloning is probably the most efficient if you're working on a consistent set of projects week over week. And generally, we recommend that when you set the clone feature up for your end users, you kind of don't allow them to do anything other than clear the hours. So it allows them to bring in the projects, bring in the tasks from the previous week or whatever timesheet they're cloning, but then they have to kind of start to enter the hours manually starting at that point. Again, allows them to not be able to just accept what was there and not alter it otherwise. Inevitably, you're going to run into my timesheet needs to be corrected. What are my options? So if the timesheet has been approved, but hasn't been run through any billing process, you can just go ahead, if you have permission, to go ahead and unapprove the timesheet, alert the end user their timesheet's been unapproved, so that they can then go in and edit the timesheet and then resubmit it. If they've changed hours, it will require a reapproval. If the hours are the same, and maybe they just changed tasks, it will simply go back to approved. You can only do this, obviously, if nothing on the timesheet has been run through a billing rule. Overlapping timesheets is another option. You can basically create a timesheet for the same period where you already have a timesheet. and then put in positive and negative, and submit that. It does require reapproval, and it's is necessary if the original timesheet can't be unapproved because it's been billed or otherwise. There is the better option of all of these, other than unapproving, is the timesheet adjustment. And the timesheet adjustment, when it was first released, was a real benefit, because before that you had to, unapproving or overlapping were your only options, and overlapping can get messy. It requires you to know what you did wrong and what should be, and you can get that wrong as well. So timesheet approvals, adjusting a timesheet that's been approved and billed gives you really the ability to have a much more auditable selection, and it can be controlled by roles, and does not require any kind of proxy capabilities. So to be able to adjust an approved timesheet, you go to the approved timesheet, and if you click on the edit, it's going to basically say you cannot edit this timesheet. It's been approved, and especially if it's been billed, you'll see which lines have been billed. But if you click on the light bulb at the top right of the page, and you'll see, if you have the permission, you'll see adjust this timesheet. When you click on adjust, it will open the timesheet up, allow you to make changes that need to be made, whether it's moving hours or swapping projects or swapping tasks. Once you save that, it's going to give you a new timesheet if you've just swapping projects or tasks, you haven't changed the hours, and you're having to create a $0 hour timesheet. And then another thing good about adjusted timesheets is you can set those so they don't need an approval. And so generally the person doing the adjustment is someone on operations, on accounting finance side, and they know exactly what they're trying to do to fix it. So then ultimately they need to fix the billing, and they don't need approval. They don't need to wait on an approval before they can fix the billing and run the billing rules again. So the adjusted timesheet can go straight in. And then the end user can see what their timesheet originally was, and then what adjustments were made, because it creates a second timesheet for the same week, and you could see that adjusted. And these can get pretty complicated. I've seen where customers will adjust an adjusted timesheet and adjust an adjusted timesheet. So not recommended, but it is feasible to apply this to not just the original timesheet, but other timesheets. So, gone are the days where OpenAir out of the box meets everyone's needs. It's amazing, once the scripting engine was released in OpenAir, how many customers now we work with to build custom scripts. And generally these scripts are just doing automating otherwise manual processes. And so a couple of scripts that we've done that are timesheet specific. We often have, if I'm submitting time, how do I limit the time entry to not go over the planned hours on a task? So, that's a, pretty common ask. OpenAir, as you all know, allows you to enter as many hours as you want against a task. The idea there is, let's see what it actually took versus what we thought it would take, and be able to learn from that. But some customers don't want that. They want to be able to stop the timesheet submission at the planned hours and then have the end user put that time elsewhere. And OpenAir does not do that out of the box. So we've created a script here that allows, in the approval process, there's an initial approval user that will evaluate the hours against the task, and if it's over planned hours, it'll automatically reject the timesheet back to the user with a note, and then they have to move their hours, split their hours, resubmit it, and then it'll evaluate it. And then once it approves it, it moves to the next approver in the process. So it's kind of a dummy approval process that goes through and does an evaluation for each timesheet. So works really well, and does solve the business problem of not entering over the planned hours. The other odyssey of OpenAir is, you can have, I mentioned schedule requests automatically populate a timesheet, but company holidays on a work schedule do not. They will designate the day as a company holiday, but it does not automatically add the hours. And so we've had customers ask us to add that. They want the work, the company holiday added to the timesheet and the 8 hours auto-populated for the end user, so they don't accidentally enter billable hours if instead of the holiday hours. So that's another one that we've done several times. Another one is if you are asking your end users for other items to be selected on the timesheet. Like we've had customers where they say the end user selects the service that they're doing or the job code that they're doing, and maybe that job code is not allowed on the project or not part of the billing rules of that project, and it's an invalid job code. So again, it follows the same sort of timesheet validation as we did with the planned hours. It goes through an approval process that evaluates, is the job code selected a valid job code versus what's in the billing rules? Is the service a valid service? If it finds it's not, it will reject it, and then otherwise it approves it forward to the next approver. And then we've also had customers that wanted to have a limit to the increments to which PTO can be requested. So as you know, I can say I want to request 30 minutes or an hour of PTO. There's no minimal PTO requirement in OpenAir if you're using the schedule requests. Some customers don't allow their end users to select anything but a half a day or a full day. And so we've put in some scripts for some customers to enforce that 4 or 8 hour increments for their time off. So in summary, OpenAir does everything you need to do about timesheets except getting people to put them in on time. We have a lot of great tools for monitoring. We have a lot of great tools for getting it in. You have the mobile app and so forth, but we can't control people's behavior, and every organization struggles with that. But that's just a common theme when we work with customers. But everything else, OpenAir does a really good job of giving you lots of options in managing your timesheets. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. Appreciate everyone's loyalty to TopStep and continued participation in our webinars. Look forward to seeing everyone next month. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording.